Academic Standard Philosophy course. Hi everyone! In the first place, what is existentialism? Is existence somewhat different from simply being?
Sure. Existence, especially in philosophy, denotes a positive act, distinct from mere survival and natural becoming.
Being as action? What sort of action?
A human being cannot even be, unless he will be. It is the unique way of being for a human. The story begins with Kant. He discovered a vast field of practice. Whatever things, especially ourselves and the world, have been, what they will be cannot be known by the theoretical reason. Because they are just ideas, or the concepts open to the future. For example, even if every country had a king until then, we could still establish a new country without one. A soldier could become the emperor of Europe. It was actually the age of revolution.
We can do things anyway.
That is a little wrong. Kant found that, there too practical reason is needed, although it differs from theoretical reason. If the method is not rational, it will not be realized. Additionally, if we try to achieve something irrational, it will not work. Kant divides the human will into three levels: arbitrary desire, individual maxim, and moral obligation. Arbitrary desire is often irrational, so it may fail. Therefore, people rationally formulate individual maxims for success, based on their tastes. However, Kant asks whether it is socially rational, even if everyone has the same maxim. For example, if everyone has the maxim to break promises, then a promise is contradicted and does not work. Thereby, we understand through practical reason that to keep a promise is a moral obligation.
I see, we have freedom of individual will, but our will should follow social moral obligation.
After Kant, Fichte focused rather on the individuality of the will. Only when a person is confronted with something other than himself, does he become aware of what he wants to do, and of his own taste. Even if given the same thing, each will respond differently. Namely, the very Handlung, management of things, conversely makes a he. In addition, Kant argued that, even if one acts righteously in accordance with moral obligations, it is unclear whether such an action will lead to happiness. This is where faith in God comes in. However, Fichte of the revolutionary era argued that it is our responsibility to create a society in which the good are rewarded. He was therefore accused of atheism and expelled from Jena University.
Action makes the person. Fichte made clear the importance of personal responsibility for one's actions.
Schelling, who succeeded Fichte at Jena University, defended him by arguing that God also self-forms through his Handlung. Fichte rejected the idea, but Hegel developed it further and discussed the dialectics of world generation by the world spirit as idealism. Feuerbach denied the existence of Hegel's world spirit. Instead, he held to materialism, according to which the physical world uses humans to develop itself. Marx further argued that capital exploits workers and is self-generating.
Where has the individual responsibility gone?
Although Schleiermacher, Schopenhauer, and Marx believed that all people have a generic essence, like branches on a single trunk, and that he is rather the source of alienation and suffering, Kierkegaard explored a single individual, again. According to him, each person's way of life is determined by God's magnificent providence. Nevertheless, forgetting the dialectic with God, guilty doubts about our way of being arise in our mind, which tears our mind from our body, and fills it with nihil, namely anxiety. He regarded this as a stubborn apostasy among modern people, and called on them to return to God.
For people intoxicated by the enthusiasm of class revolution and national war, the life and death of individuals probably didn't matter much. On the other hand, for Kierkegaard, who was physically disabled and unable to move as he wished, and who was plagued by the anxiety that he alone could disappear from this world any day, his unique divine vocation was more of a concern than the generic essence of human beings.
Kierkegaard said that life is the dialectical unification of reality and the ideal. However, if a person pursues too many realities, his life will become diluted. But if he limits his realities, his personality becomes scrubby. As well, when a person worries about too many possibilities, he loses sight of reality. But when he leaves everything to inevitability, he loses himself. Each person is given a unique way of life within divine providence, as a single individual. Those who do not know this, will become carried away by momentary pleasure, and lose their lives. Those who know this, but are dissatisfied with it, run away from being themselves, and imitate someone successful, however also only to lose their own lives. Some refuse to let anyone, even God, decide their lives, and try to find their own way, but they too become nothing.
They all forget God, turn away from Him, and go astray.
However, there are reasons for them. To unify reality and the ideal, a person must first deny his current reality, and take a step toward his ideal. This is the internal dialectic. But, it is easier, to be content with the current reality. In addition, since we are not omniscient or omnipotent like God, we do not know the big picture of our unique lives within divine providence. What we are faced with is, always a concrete one-off choice, between this or that. As long as it is our own unique life's choice, others' precedents and general opinions are of no use. So, we should engage in dialogue with the all-knowing God, at every moment. This is the qualitative dialectics. And we hope that, our lives have been consistent in the divine providence.
Fichte insisted that we should create a world in which good deeds lead to happiness, but I understood now what Kant meant when he said that faith is needed to fill the gap between good deeds and happiness.
Around the same time, as the Industrial Revolution unfolded, empirical science flourished, and some considered only materialism, without any ideology, to be objective and scientific. Initially, involved in the labor movement, Lang became disillusioned with Marxist materialism, and instead established Neo-Kantianism. According to him, materialism may describe the phenomena, but does not know the things themselves. In the first place, phenomena consist only of a connection within some subject. However, the subject is not a personal one that Kant said, but a world organism. It gives everything the respective meaning, and phenomena happen only within it.
Schopenhauer's nature, Marx's autonomic capital, and Lang's world organism were not so different. They were pantheism of the materialized world spirit of Hegel.
Dilthey at Berlin University studied Schleiermacher's hermeneutics. Originally, it was a method of interpreting the Bible, to discern the intended meanings in the background, from the written words. However, it was a plunge into the hermeneutical circulation, in which, the part depends on the whole, while the whole is based on the parts. He applied hermeneutics, to understanding reality. Our reality consists of the relation of life. The whole life determines the meaning of each thing. In addition, even we are also just the ones, within our whole life. Therefore, he emphasized, the historicity of hermeneutics. We may want to interpret the world objectively, but we ourselves also live in a circulation of being interpreted historically.
We humans are not a god outside the created world.
The psychologist Brentano at Vienna University was also influenced by Kant's constructivism and Schleiermacher's hermeneutics. He realized that a person's own explanations were always wrapped around his interpretations of the object as his intentionality. Physicist Mach also found that objective natural science is in fact based on many subjective direct sensations, raw data, and that the objectivity is rather something subjectively constructed later for the economy of thought.
People's explanations are usually subjective and opportunistic. Even the objective knowledge that there is a cube is actually constructed from the direct sensations of seeing a square, two rectangles, or three diamonds.
Cohen, who took over Lang at Marburg University, developed Neo-Kantianism. He assumed a state, concretely as the world organism. It is the subject of search for the natural science, as well as the morality of the society, and even the beauty of the art. Individuals should formulate their private maxims, so that they are universally valid, in the state. In short, the very state gives things and persons their meaning. As well, influenced by Lang, Windelband at Strasbourg University realized that, before the recognition of things, we subjectively choose the objects that interest us. Only what we privilege to have meaning can have meaning. Otherwise, they cannot even exist. Following our own values of truth, goodness, and beauty, we evaluate and describe the individuality of the objects, ideographically.
Both thoughts already had the smell of Nazism, the National Socialism of a later age.
Nietzsche was the son of a Lutheran pastor, and could not accept the popular Catholic doctrine that God leads good deeds to happiness. Furthermore, he doubted even the existence of God. According to him, our God is just the idol that the weak invented to overcome the strong, as ressentiment. However, modern people have even killed such an idol, so we have lost the value that such a God has supported too, and we have to live in nihil. The strong may rule the world for a time, but because they are not absolute, they will be overcome by the next strong. Thus, the meaninglessness continues forever.
He was too pessimistic.
Yeah, once he was. But in Zarathustra in 1883-85, he declared to accept the nihil as the truth of the world. Actually, all that lives in the world, even animals and plants, has the will to power. They find the meaning to live, in their temporal ruling, even though they know that, others will eventually overcome them, and that, everything will become meaningless. He said, that is the true strength. The will to power, not only supports its world, and gives meaning to it, but also provides itself, with its own meaning to live, for itself.
Even if temporarily, giving meaning to the world is the meaning of one's existence.
He called such a person, who overcomes the meaninglessness of the world, Uevermensh, or the high stepper. He may be spoken ill of as a devil, for destroying a stale world, but he rescues the lost meaning, and paves the way for the future. Naturally, his activity lasts not so long. However, he even welcomes his own downfall, having fulfilled his role. It is the love for fate. Thus, he lives forever along with fate. For example, parents and teachers may feel, they have completed their job, only when their children or students no longer require their care. As well, a carpenter builds a house, and a writer delivers a book to readers, fulfilling their existence. The will to power desires, even to bring its own existence to nihil again.
The nihil of the world, rather, is what gives meaning to the existence of the high stepper, who gives meaning to the world.
However, as Kierkegaard also criticized, modern people have forgotten the missions of their existence. They cling to dying stale values, and race to the back of the line. Nevertheless, they claim, to be the top of the times. Grinning inanely, they are mediocrely homogeneous, content with passive happiness without hope and ideals, and avoid all risk. Though they may not be nihilists, they are the very nihil, for themselves.
They dislike the high stepper, who won't stand in the line, such as Jesus.
The ancient Alexandrian mathematician Euclid systematically established geometry, with 5 postulates. Straight lines between 2 points, the infinite extension of straight lines, circles, right angles, and parallel lines that never cross. Although his geometry had been the foundation of natural science, until modern times, the absoluteness of the 5th postulate of parallels was called into question, by surveys of the Earth during the Age of Discovery.
The medians at 0 and 90 degrees east are parallel, but intersect at the North Pole. The sum of the angles of the equilateral triangle is 270 degrees.
Italian physician Cardano introduced imaginary numbers, as a result of solving the cubic equation using the formula. Surprisingly, even so, algebra was performed without contradictions. Descartes invented algebraic geometry, and Gauss refined it into a complex plane, with an imaginary vertical axis. Riemann projected a sphere onto the complex plane, by assuming 1 per 0 to be infinite. Similarly, various non-Euclidean geometries without the parallel postulate, became amenable to algebraic computation. In addition, Descartes treated the whole of numbers, as a set, and defined the real numbers and imaginary numbers, by dividing it. Cantor also studied the sets of numbers, and found that, infinity has various densities.
I understand what a sphere is, but what do those things that come up in the calculations mean?
Your question is correct. So far, the logical calculations had produced consistent results without contradiction, but no one had understood what they meant. However, Frege invented predicate logic, which uses set theory, to allow propositions to be discussed without defining the objects involved. It is not a simple logic that directly asks objects, but a second-order logic, that discusses sets that contain objects. For example, dog is not a subject, but rather a set defined by the predicate of dog. For the objects, it only mentions either all of them, or at least one of them, using quantifiers. Here, every proposition is reduced to the fact of whether a subjective predicate set is contained in a predicative predicate set, namely, the inclusion relationship between two sets, without asking about the objects.
I wonder why he didn't include the intermediate degrees to quantifiers, like roughly, approximately, or somewhat.
Anyway, Frege's predicate logic made it possible to discuss the truth or falsity of predicates, without demonstrating their objects. Hilbert regarded even geometry as a purely logical system based on arbitrary empty axioms that contain no concrete objects. Thus, the primary focus of mathematics shifted to proving the existence of solutions and the consistency of systems.
It's just like theology.
Mathematician Husserl felt a sense of crisis in the sciences. Although mathematics is the foundation of all sciences, it has become detached from reality, and given up showing its actual meaning. However, he was convinced by neither psychologism nor normativism. The former grounds mathematics in psychological facts, but then, the meaning of mathematics varies from person to person. Meanwhile, the latter considers it a rule to follow without reason. Both are merely a quaestio facti, and cannot justify the meaning of mathematics, as a quaestio juris. So, he sought the common platform between mathematics and sciences, namely phenomena for us.
It's certainly strange why everyone's math answers are the same.
In the default installation of our consciousness, we recognize a thing as something that exists there. However, as Maha said, what we accept is in fact the raw data of our direct sensations. The function of our consciousness, noesis, transforms them into the something and gives it the outer existency. Then, the something is not the object, but our idea that our consciousness has in advance. The way from naive outer credulity to reflective inner idea is the transcendental reduction.
We tend to judge things by their appearance, and perhaps we don't really pay attention to the object itself.
Still, the nuances of the ideas, noema, may differ from person to person. So, we imagine various things within the noema, strip away the unimportant attributes, and narrow it down to what absolutely must be. The remainder is the essence. This operation is the eidetic reduction. As noesis, our consciousness gives existency, namely number, to the object that fulfills some essence. Thus, mathematics and the sciences necessarily correspond, and the meaning of mathematics to the sciences had now been demonstrated. Nonetheless, beyond mathematics, Husserl furthermore tried to rebuild even time and space within our consciousness, and to explain how the noema is generated. In addition, he faced the problem of recognizing others, who may have a different world within their consciousness, and he got lost.
Did he think he was a god who creates the world?
Husserl's analysis of consciousness was a thoroughly mathematical operation. However, Bergson attributed the root cause of our meaning loss to such scientific mathematical analysis. Indeed, the external world is a quantitative extension, and things exist separately like numbers, but consciousness has no size. It is composed of a fusion of various qualitative emotions, which together form temporal duration. Conversely, there is no time in the external world, and it always exists, only in the present. Movement and change are experienced only in consciousness, through the reinforcement and overlaying of memories.
A powerful opponent has appeared.
Not only determinists who believe in mathematical law as absolute, but also libertarians like Kant, who barely see freedom only in the human possibility of not following rules, have lost sight of true freedom. What truly exists is neither the mind nor the body, but the pure duration of various images. It exercises free will, and causes élan vital, free from the constraints of the past or the external world. Bergson argued that this pure duration exists in society and in living things as well, and called for the restoration of one's own free will, not bound by anything.
He was a sort of idealism, and smelled like Nazism too.
Jaspers started as a psychologist, under Neo-Kantian Windelband at Heidelberg University, and initially followed Husserl's phenomenology. Due to poor health, he barely avoided conscription during World War I, but the gap between war propaganda and reality profoundly altered his worldview. He asserted that phenomena never reach the true entity, and that analysis of phenomena may prove the commonalities between mathematics and the sciences for us, but cannot overcome nihilism. He thought, the very ontology, the elucidation of the entity, is the unique mission of philosophy, distinct from any sciences.
Ontology, that was too old-fashioned. From Locke to Kant, modern philosophy had praised such things outside of sight, deeming them unknowable.
Indeed, he discusses three things that Kant excluded from recognition as transcendental visions: God, the world, and the soul. In the objective world, God is the transcendent, and the soul is the attendee. His point is that the attendee of this world is identified with the transcendent beyond the objective world, as a subjective entity, or the act of existence. His method to show this was similar to Husserl's phenomenology. Although we usually live in a factual orientation, considering the world as real, the world is in fact just a phenomenon of the transcendent. However, as single individuals, we may find ourselves in historical, personal, and contradictory edge situations that we did not choose, such as war. At that moment, through communication with the attendees, we rather can rediscover the same freedom as the transcendent, beyond the edge of necessity.
It sounds mythical, but something that we can understand.
Drawing on Dilthey's life hermeneutics too, a pupil of Husserl at Freiburg University, and a friend of Jaspers, Heidegger, skillfully described the attendees in the world, in his Being and Time, in 1927. According to him, an attendee is thrown into an unfamiliar world of methodical things, and is plagued by anxiety. Therefore, without understanding why, he behaves like people, and forgets his own being. However, faced with his impending death, he became aware of his temporal existence, and worked backward from there, projecting his own way of life. Heidegger then attempted to elucidate ontology from this temporality.
Heidegger sought to approach the transcendental entity, not through Jaspers' existential freedom, but through temporality.
It is not simply an exchange. Heidegger denied the possibility of freedom, and believed in historical necessity. He was a longtime supporter of Hitler, as an anti-Semite. He joined the Nazis, turned radical students into his guard, and became rector of Freiburg University. On the other hand, Jaspers, who argued for ontology that transcends cognition, was disliked by the Neo-Kantians at Heidelberg University. In addition, he was expelled from the university, because his wife was Jewish. Husserl, ex-professor at Freiburg University, was also Jewish, stripped of his qualifications, and banned from publishing. Jaspers' student Hannah Arendt was once Heidegger's love, but was abandoned, and forced into exile as a Jew. However, lacking the support of professors, Heidegger's plot failed, and when the elite SS purged the grassroots essay, in 1934, the Nazis also disliked him. Nevertheless, he studied Nietzsche, and still clung to Nazism.
Heidegger was a common little man, full of resentment just like the members of the SA, though Nietzsche hated such fellows most.
When Jaspers' wife was about to be taken to a concentration camp, they even decided to commit suicide, but at that time, the very American army liberated Heidelberg. Heidegger was held responsible for the war, but escaped punishment, by claiming that he had been disliked by the Nazis. However, as his wartime misdeeds, and the giant works of Husserl and Jaspers, which Nazism erased, come to light, his pedantic hodgepodge has lost its magic, and time drifts him into oblivion.
They were all swayed by the times. However, Jasper barely endured and survived with his wife through believing in his philosophy.
Sartre, a high school teacher, was drafted as a weatherman, but was soon taken prisoner. After his release, he served as a substitute teacher for Jews, in German-occupied empty Paris. He doubted not only ancient ontology, but also modern epistemology. The ancient philosophers believed, the entity has divine power, and rules the world. However, actually, it merely exists without any meaning, and its bulk nous eats us. Furthermore, our consciousness, the modern one's thought that which supports the whole world, does not have even such an entityness. However, he rather sought human existence, from this emptiness of consciousness, in being and nothingness, in 1943.
Sartre was an atheistic nihilist.
Sartre's considerations were phenomenological, but, unlike Husserl, he qualified an object, as the existence by itself. In contrast, consciousness is, just an existence for me, without even the essence. When we seek something, it first generates the lack. The function also allows us, to pursue what we are to be, as freedom. However, it is not possible that, what is just an existence for me, becomes an existence by itself. It is a self-deception, that, only I think, I have become it. Therefore, as existence for others, namely our physical bodies, we try to realize the unification of existence for me and existence by itself, through the gaze of others. However, the ambiguous situation is the same for others, so we have no choice but to be recognized by others as objects, or to remain empty and treat others as objects, in the conflict. Anyway, driven by the annihilation by consciousness, that is, cursed by freedom, we must always keep becoming ourselves.
Self-profession is quite meaningless, but even if getting people's approval, the people are still unreliable. We are drifting on meaninglessness.
Another high school teacher, and friend of Sartre, Merleau-Ponty examined phenomenology, from a physiological perspective, in the structure of behavior, in 1942. Behavior is not simply a conditioned reflex to a stimulus. Positive activity and passive keeping equilibrium, are integrated cyclically, and promote learning, that is, subjective meaning giving, beyond instinct. Furthermore, human beings can simultaneously ascribe multiple meanings, to the same object, from different perspectives. Then, the objects are symbolized, and come to exist independently of us. However, the object is reclaimed, with a different meaning, by our practical intention, our needs for action, at each moment. Therefore, we and objects are in fact, a unified organization, from the beginning.
With the explanation of this structure, he rejected the dualism of mind and matter, and that of cognition and practice.
Merleau-Ponty went further, in his Phenomenology of Perception, in 1945, to the very roots of phenomena. Just as Bergson viewed consciousness, society, and living things as a duration of fusion, Merleau-Ponty also believed that, the fusion is the true entity. Perception is a dialectical complementarity between consciousness and objects, so it cannot be reduced to either. As well, a living body is a phenomenon, between consciousness and the lived world. Similarly, language is the unity of thought of consciousness and the movement of the body. Furthermore, others are, just our counterparts of the same one society. All of these are originally ambiguous and synthetic. Nevertheless, the atomistic thinking of modern philosophy caused us to lose sight of the nature of the totality.
After all, is meaning the very relationship between us and the world?
After the war, France regained its sovereignty, but its colonies, Algeria, Vietnam, and the Middle East, also demanded independence, and chaos and wars ensued. Sartre insisted on the very engagement with society, to establish the meaning of human empty existence, and he devoted himself to political activity as well, enthusiastically supporting Stalin and Mao, who fought for the colonies. However, Merleau-Ponty was disgusted by these dictators, and distanced himself from the violent left movement and Sartre. Indeed, Merleau-Ponty was also based on dialectic, but he criticized Marxism, in his Adventures of the Dialectic, in 1955. Dialectic may be valid in revolution, but thereafter, it must degenerate into a synthetic dictatorship, or it falls into perpetual reflection without synthesis, namely autocritique, that repeatedly fabricates enemies within. That is a false meaning of life.
His prediction was actually correct.
As Kierkegaard said, as existence, we are constantly called upon to engage in a dialectic of breaking away from reality, and integrating with the ideal. However, if the ideal is merely a temporal self-destructive fashion, fabricated by political confusion or industrial society, it will only exacerbate the alienation of humanity that Marx identified, or the oblivion of self-being that Heidegger pointed out. We must start by creating and projecting our ideal, for ourselves.